Dad and me love a whole lot of history. We could be the greatest team that the world has ever seen. Dad and me love a whole lot of history. Welcome to Dad and Me Love History. I'm James.
And I'm Dad. So we're going to release one new episode each month because James is too busy to make them more often.
Because you are too busy.
Well, I guess, as well as teaching, I'm doing some things for ABC Radio here in Australia and something for BBC TV. Plus, I'm busy launching my latest World War II novel, The Slightest Chance. Anyway, today we investigate...
Why isn't Sydney the capital of Australia? Sydney is Australia's biggest and most famous city.
Okay, so here we are in the rocks in Sydney. This is where the first settlement was built in Australia. Do you know who the first people were before any settlements were built? The first people to arrive in Australia and to explore it who were not natives like the Aboriginals?
The Dutch.
Yeah, the Dutch were the first Europeans, the first what we call recorded contact. That means that we have definite evidence the Dutch came here in 1606. But before that, we think...
Was it Chinese?
Excellent. We think there were Chinese travellers, Indian, coming and buying and selling goods here.
I learnt that in school about Zheng He.
Yeah.
And he was like, there's not enough evidence that he came here, but he might have. So we think he might have came first.
Yeah, and history is often like that. We don't have a definite answer. We know, of course, who came here in 1770?
Captain James Cook.
That's right, from Britain. He was mapping the east coast of Australia. So that's over 160 years after the Dutch were the first Europeans to come here. So Captain James Cook in 1770. And then who came and arrived here in 1788?
Arthur Philip. He came with the first colony.
Yeah, the first fleet. And do you know what town it left, where it started its journey in the UK, in England? Do you know what city it left? Portsmouth, my hometown. So the first fleet left from Portsmouth, and do you know who were they bringing here?
Prisoners.
Yeah, prisoners. You could have just stolen a sheep or something like that, and you get put on a boat, sent around the other side of the world, and you almost certainly wouldn't be going back. The prisoners were made to build some of the buildings here, and some of them were then, eventually, they'd served their sentence, they were set free, and they were able to work and make a life for themselves here. So, do you know where we are now, James?
Sydney Museum.
That's right, Sydney Museum, or Museum of Sydney, and we're in the gallery about the first fleet. And there are ships in front of us representing, copies of what the first fleet looked like. How many ships were in the first fleet, James?
11.
11, that's right. There were 2 naval ships, so warships, and then 6 transport ships which were transporting convicts, prisoners, from England to Australia. And do you know what the other ships were for? There were 3 more ships.
They used it for storage. Food.
Yeah, that's right. Store ships carrying all the food they'd need on their journey, and also, of course, when they arrive. And in this museum, you should be able to find out how many people were on board these ships altogether. Do you know?
1,500 people and 775 prisoners.
So the other people were sailors and officers, and some of their wives and children as well. And then 775 prisoners who knew they would never return to England. So James is going to talk us through where the first fleet went, like where they started, where they stopped off on their way to Australia.
They started at Portsmouth, England, and went down the Atlantic Ocean and then to Rio in Brazil and went to Cape of Good Hope in South Africa and came to Botany Bay in Australia.
So they arrived in Botany Bay, which is in Sydney, a little bit south of where we are now, on the 19th and 20th of January 1788. But they didn't like the look of that. They didn't think they could settle down there, so they shifted. They got back on their ships and went north just a couple of miles, few miles, to Sydney Cove, where they landed there on the 26th of January. And they called it Port Jackson. But to the Aboriginal peoples who were watching these Europeans arrive, this marked the beginning of an invasion that would bring disaster to those indigenous, those native people. So really, the first fleet, when they arrived in 1788, they were invading this land that they called Terra Nullius. They said it was an empty, unused land. Of course, that was just what they said. In reality, there were native indigenous people living here. And where we are now, we're in the Rocks Discovery Museum, and in this area of the rocks and Sydney Cove, the Cadigal Aboriginal people were living here. And when the British arrived, they used all the food that was growing on the land themselves, and they took it. And so the local indigenous people were soon starving. Also, disease spread from the British people who'd arrived here to the local people, and many died from smallpox. Those who did survive were forced to move out of the Sydney region. So what are we seeing in the paintings in this room, James?
Well, we're seeing the British come and destroying the Aboriginals' homes and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a pretty good description. So James, we've been around the Rocks Museum and now Sydney Museum. Both have told us quite a lot about the first settlement, the first people who came from Europe to Sydney. But our question is, why is Sydney not Australia's capital? And do you think we know the answer to that now? Have we found anything in these museums that helps?
Nope. Still think Sydney should be the capital of Australia.
Still think Sydney should be the capital of Australia. Well, it's obviously not, so I reckon we should go to where is the capital of Australia. What do you think? So where are we going to go?
Canberra.
We're off to Canberra.
History, we love history, baby. We love history. And now we go to an advert break for parents.
The Slightest Chance is my latest World War II thriller love story based around real history. After the Japanese won the Battle of Hong Kong, a young English woman named Gwen, who was a real person, was the only female to escape from a Japanese camp, and she did so on foot, and then faced an 800-mile journey across occupied China. By the end of this novel, you will have learned all about her extraordinary adventure and how Gwen was secretly carrying information which the very top of the British government would use in the fight against Imperial Japan. Also from real history, included in the novel is the mass breakout led by a one-legged Chinese admiral, and then there's the Japanese guard, Kiyoshi Watanabe, whose Christian faith pushed him to risk his life helping Japan's enemies. Find out more at poorletters.com. The Slightest Chance, when your enemy is your best friend.
Dad's new novel is now available to order online at all the usual places, or order it directly from the publisher, Blacksmith Books. Books. For details, go to poorletters.com or click on the link from Dad and me love history.com. We love history. We love history, baby. We love history.
So, we drove 1,000 kilometres all the way from home in Queensland to Sydney just to find out the answer to our question for this episode. And did we find that answer in Sydney?
Nope.
So, we had to drive hundreds of kilometres more to...
Canberra.
And where are we now in Canberra?
House of Parliament? No, Parliament of House.
Parliament House, that's right. You can hear the sound of water in the background. So there's a kind of a fountain system going on here. And that apparently is to make sure that when the politicians and the government leaders are walking through these corridors, they can have their whispering secret conversations and people won't be able to hear what they're saying. So we're having our secret conversation over here as well. So we found out that Melbourne was actually a rich city in the 19th century. Do you know why it was rich from what we've seen?
Because there was gold there.
Yeah, so they found gold there. The population grew as more people wanted to find gold, so it became bigger than Sydney. And there was a big kind of like a rivalry, almost a competition between Sydney and Melbourne for who could be the most important. So we're meeting our expert guide who works here at Parliament House, who hopefully is going to be able to answer our question. Hi, I'm Dad.
Hi, I'm James.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline.
So we have a question. Why isn't Sydney the capital of Australia?
Yeah, and why is it here?
That's a very interesting question. You probably realise that people that live in Sydney and people that live in Melbourne often argue about which city is better. People that lived in Sydney wanted Sydney to be the capital, and people that lived in Melbourne wanted Melbourne to be the capital. So they decided that the capital, the national capital, had to be between Sydney and Melbourne. And some say that it had to be somewhere where it wasn't too warm and it wasn't too pleasant, because the politicians needed to work somewhere that was a bit cold so they didn't get too relaxed and comfortable.
Oh, so it's not like a holiday resort, somewhere between halfway between Melbourne and Sydney, and it was nothing like a holiday place.
That's exactly right. So Canberra, which is where we are now, was actually sheep farms. There was nothing here at all, and so they built the national capital here in Canberra.
So Britain had set up colonies around Australia, Sydney, Melbourne, and they decided in 1901 that those colonies would all join together and form a country. So Australia was not actually a country until 1901. So when they formed this new country in 1901, they had to decide where to put their capital city. And everyone who wasn't from Sydney said, we are not going to accept it, we're not going to like it at all, we're not going to agree to Sydney being the capital. In fact, we want the capital to be at least how far from Sydney?
100 miles.
100 miles from Sydney. And so they chose a sheep station, a sheep farm area, which was pretty much in the middle of nowhere, a bit nearer to Sydney than to Melbourne, but in between the two. And it was given the name Canberra. So, we had to do lots of travelling from Queensland to Sydney to Canberra, but eventually we found out why the capital city is not Sydney, and it's pretty much in the middle of what was nowhere.
I thought it wasn't in the middle, I thought it was close to Sydney.
Okay. So, if you love Dad and Me Love History, don't forget to tell your friends about us.
You can find us on Instagram.
And Facebook.
And Twitter.
And do rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. Bye for now from
Dad and Me Love History. Dad and me love a whole lot of history. We could be the greatest team that the world has ever seen. Dad and me love a whole lot of history. Here were some questions to see if you were listening.
1. Admiral Zheng might have been the first person from a different continent to visit Australia. Which country was Admiral Zheng from?
Number 2. What year did Captain Cook arrive in Australia?
3. From which UK city did Admiral Arthur Philip and the First Fleet leave for Australia?
What year did Arthur Philip and the First Fleet arrive in Australia?
Number 5. The first colony was built in what is now known as the Rocks area of Sydney. Who was living around that area before the British arrived?
Number 6. At least how many miles from Sydney did the capital city have to be?
7. Parliament House is where Australia's Parliament meets and works. What used to be there in that area before they built Australia's capital city?
Number 8. And finally, in what year was the country of Australia officially started?
Okay. If you've got anything else to say, you can say it.
Blah blah blah, poo poo poo, wah wah wah. Voice tested. Ow! Let it go, let it go.
Sorry to read that. Right, so we'll just have the intro music and then...
Welcome to Dad and Me Love History. I'm James.
Right then, Smelly Bottom. You going off to football?
Long Kong. Rapina! Bye bye.
See ya.
You can make some noise now, Mum.